I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, even though it makes me look like an absolute disaster of a human being. Maybe especially because it makes me look like that. I'm Sadie Lane. I'm 26 now. And 3 years ago, I made the kind of choices that still keep me awake at night, wondering how I could have been so spectacularly stupid. It started with Carson Mitchell, who is everything a girl thinks she wants when she's 23 and doesn't know any better. He had this job at a marketing firm downtown, drove a decent car, remembered anniversaries, and never once made me doubt that he loved me completely. We'd been together for 2.5 years, living in this cute little duplex with a garden I pretended to care about because it made him happy. But here's the thing nobody tells you about getting exactly what you think you want. Sometimes it feels like drowning in vanilla pudding. Safe, sweet, but suffocating in its predictability. Carson would come home every evening at exactly 6:15, kiss me hello in the exact same spot by the front door, and ask about my day in that careful way that meant he actually wanted to hear the answer. Then we'd make dinner together, watch whatever show we were binge-watching that month, and fall asleep by 11 because he had to be up early for his morning run. I started feeling like I was disappearing into this life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt like wearing a sweater that was slightly too small. Every day the same, every conversation predictable, every future moment mapped out in comfortable, mind-numbing detail. The worst part was that I couldn't even complain about it without sounding ungrateful. Carson wasn't neglectful or mean or boring. He was attentive and kind and genuinely interesting when he talked about his work or his plans for us. But I felt like I was watching my life happen to someone else. Like I was playing house instead of actually living. So naturally, instead of having an honest conversation about feeling restless, I did what any mature 23-year-old would do. I started picking fights about everything else. The way he loaded the dishwasher, his inability to choose a restaurant without polling 3 different review apps, how he always had to plan our weekend activities by Wednesday. I turned my existential crisis into his personal failings, because that felt easier than admitting I didn't know what I actually wanted. Carson, being Carson, tried to fix whatever I complained about, started leaving dishes for me to load my way, picked restaurants randomly, suggested spontaneous weekend trips, which only made me more frustrated because he was missing the point, except I wasn't sure what the point was either. Then my high school 10-year reunion rolled around. I almost didn't go. Carson and I had been fighting more frequently, and I wasn't in the mood to pretend my life was fabulous for people I barely remembered. But my best friend from high school, Katie, guilted me into it by saying she needed moral support to face all the people who'd gotten married and had babies, while she was still bartending and dating musicians. The reunion was exactly what you'd expect. A hotel ballroom decorated with our old-school colors, everyone trying to prove they'd won life since graduation, awkward small talk lubricated by overpriced drinks. I was bored within the first hour and ready to leave until I saw him. Bryce Hamilton. God, just thinking his name still makes me feel stupid. In high school, he was that guy, the one every girl had a crush on, but who never seemed to notice anyone existed. Star athlete, effortlessly cool, the kind of beautiful that made teachers stutter. I'd been invisible to him for 4 years, just another face in the hallway. But 10 years had changed things. I'd figured out makeup and how to dress my body, had interesting stories from college and my job at the veterinary clinic. And apparently, time had been kind to me, because when Bryce saw me across the room, his face lit up like I was exactly who he'd been hoping to see. He came over immediately, all smiles and familiarity, talking like we'd been close friends instead of virtual strangers. Told me I looked incredible, that he'd always thought I was smart and funny back in school, but had been too stupid and shy to ever talk to me. Total lies, obviously, but delivered with such conviction that I wanted to believe them. We ended up talking for hours. He was working construction, had been married briefly right after high school, but divorced 2 years later. No kids. Said he'd been focused on getting his life together, working hard, staying out of trouble. made it sound noble instead of like he'd been drifting for a decade. The attention was intoxicating. Here was this guy I'd fantasized about as a teenager, treating me like I was fascinating and beautiful, hanging on every word. He asked about my life, seemed genuinely impressed by my job and my relationship, but kept saying things like, he's a lucky guy, whoever he is, in this way that suggested maybe I was the one settling. When the reunion ended, we exchanged numbers. Just to keep in touch, he said, but his eyes suggested otherwise. I told myself it was harmless, just nice to reconnect with old classmates, maintain friendships, expand my social circle. The texting started innocent enough. How was your weekend? Remember this funny thing from high school? Here's a picture of a dog I saw that reminded me of the ones at your clinic. But it escalated quickly into deeper conversations about life and dreams and disappointments. Bryce was charming in text, funny and flirtatious, but not so obviously that I couldn't pretend it was just friendly. Meanwhile, my fights with Carson got worse. I'd come home from work in a bad mood, pick apart everything he'd done that day, then spend the evening texting Bryce while Carson tried to figure out what he'd done wrong. The contrast was devastating. Carson trying desperately to fix problems I wouldn't clearly explain, while Bryce made me feel effortlessly appreciated and understood. I started building a case against Carson in my head. He was too predictable, too comfortable, too satisfied with mediocrity. He didn't challenge me or inspire me to grow. We'd fallen into a routine that felt more like roommates than lovers. All true, but not exactly his fault since I'd never mentioned feeling that way. The emotional affair with Bryce went on for weeks before I admitted to myself what it was. We were texting all day, every day. He'd send me pictures from job sites. I'd send him funny stories from work. We talked about everything, childhood memories, future dreams, what we'd do if we won the lottery. It felt like the connection I'd been missing with Carson, except it was built on fantasy and nostalgia instead of reality. That's when I hatched my brilliant plan. I couldn't just break up with Carson out of nowhere. That would make me look shallow and impulsive. But if I framed it as needing space to work on myself, to figure out who I was outside of a relationship, then I'd look mature and self-aware instead of like someone abandoning a good man for a high school crush. I picked a Sunday afternoon when Carson was in one of his planning moods, making lists for the upcoming week and talking about a vacation we should take in the fall. Perfect timing to feel suffocated by his future-focused energy. I need to talk to you about something important, I said, settling onto the couch next to him with my most serious expression. Carson immediately gave me his full attention, closing his laptop and turning to face me completely. Even then, even as I was about to manipulate him, he was being exactly the kind of partner anyone would want. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, I started. And I'm realizing I have some things I need to work through, personal things about who I am and what I want from life. His face got that careful, concerned look. Okay, do you want to talk about it? Maybe we could figure it out together. This was exactly what I'd expected, Carson's instinct to fix and solve and support, which made it easier to frame as the problem. That's just it, I said, taking his hand in what I hoped looked like a loving gesture. I think I've become too dependent on you, on us. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not half of a couple. I need some space to grow as an individual before I can be the partner you deserve. I watched his face process this, seeing the confusion and hurt he was trying to hide. Are you asking for a break? Not a break, I said quickly. More like a pause. I need to move out temporarily, spend some time rediscovering myself. Go to therapy, maybe take some classes, just focus on personal growth, without the pressure of managing a relationship at the same time. Carson was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him trying to find the right response. Finally, he said, if that's what you need, then I want to support you. But can I ask where this is coming from? Have I done something to make you feel like you can't grow within our relationship? The genuine care in his voice almost broke my resolve. But then my phone buzzed with a text from Bryce, probably some funny observation about his day. And I remembered the excitement of feeling truly seen and appreciated. It's not about anything you've done wrong, I said. You're wonderful. That's almost the problem. I've gotten so comfortable that I've stopped challenging myself. I need to remember who I am outside of being your girlfriend. We talked for another hour, with Carson asking thoughtful questions and trying to understand what I needed, while I gave him vague answers about self-discovery and personal growth. Eventually, he agreed to what I was asking for, though I could see how much it hurt him. He even offered to help me find a place to stay temporarily and said he'd give me whatever space I needed while still being available if I wanted to talk. The guilt was overwhelming, but I pushed it down by telling myself I was doing the right thing for both of us. How could I be a good partner when I was having feelings for someone else? Better to deal with my issues honestly than to continue being resentful and unfair to Carson. I moved in with Katie, who had a spare room in her apartment and was going through her own relationship drama. Perfect cover for my story about needing space and time with female friends to rediscover myself. I told Carson I'd be staying there temporarily while I worked through my personal issues. The first few days felt like freedom. No schedule to maintain, no one to check in with, no responsibility to consider anyone else's feelings before making plans. I could text Bryce whenever I wanted without feeling guilty. Could even suggest meeting up in person now that I had space from Carson. Our first real date happened 3 days after I moved out. I told Katie I was going to a yoga class. Had to maintain the self-improvement narrative even with my friends. Bryce picked me up in his truck, and we drove to this little dive bar across town where no one would recognize us. He looked even better than he had at the reunion, all confident and relaxed in his element. Bought me drinks, told me stories about his work crew, made me laugh until my sides hurt. The chemistry was undeniable, electric in a way I'd never felt with Carson. When he walked me to his truck afterward, the tension was so thick I could barely breathe. I've been thinking about you since high school, he said, leaning against the driver's side door. Always wondered what it would be like if I'd been smart enough to ask you out back then. More lies, but I was so drunk on the attention and the fantasy that I didn't care. When he kissed me, it felt like every romance novel I'd ever read. Desperate and passionate and completely consuming. We didn't sleep together that night, but it was close. I went home to Katie's buzzing with excitement and possibility, feeling more alive than I had in months. For the first time since moving out, I barely thought about Carson at all. The affair escalated quickly from there. Bryce and I started meeting up several times a week, always with elaborate cover stories for Katie and Carson. I was supposedly attending therapy sessions, yoga classes, job interviews, coffee dates with old friends. In reality, I was falling deeper into this fantasy relationship built on stolen moments and the thrill of doing something forbidden. The sex was incredible, different from Carson in every way, urgent and unpredictable and raw. Bryce made me feel like a different person, someone wild and spontaneous instead of the responsible, predictable woman I'd been with Carson. We'd meet at his apartment, at hotels, even in his truck parked behind abandoned buildings. The risk made everything more intense. Carson, meanwhile, was being exactly what I'd asked for, supportive but not pushy. Available but respectful of my space. He'd text me every few days to check in, send me articles he thought I'd find interesting. Let me know he was thinking about me without being overwhelming. His patience and understanding made me feel worse about what I was doing, but also justified my decision. If he really loved me, wouldn't he fight harder? Wouldn't he demand to know what was really going on? I convinced myself that Carson's acceptance of our separation proved we weren't right for each other. A man who truly wanted me wouldn't let me walk away so easily. Bryce, on the other hand, made it clear how much he wanted me. How he couldn't stop thinking about me, how I was driving him crazy with desire. The contrast made Carson seem weak and Bryce seem passionate. The double life was exhausting but exhilarating. I was constantly crafting stories, managing timelines, making sure my lies were consistent. But I felt more attractive and desirable than I had in years. Bryce couldn't keep his hands off me, told me constantly how beautiful I was. How lucky he felt to be with me. After 2.5 years of comfortable, predictable love with Carson, the intensity was addictive. I started planning my exit strategy. Once I figured out how to transition from Carson to Bryce without looking like the villain, I could stop living this lie and start my new life. I pictured introducing Bryce to my friends and family, finally having a relationship that felt exciting and alive instead of safe and stagnant. But of course, life had other plans. I realized I was pregnant on a Monday morning in Katie's bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines, while she knocked on the door, asking if I was okay. 3 pregnancy tests later, I was sitting on her bedroom floor, having a complete breakdown. The timing made everything impossibly complicated. Carson and I had slept together during my last visit to pick up more clothes. One of those moments where our old chemistry temporarily overrode our complicated situation. And Bryce and I had been, well, we'd been busy. I literally had no idea whose baby this was. My first reaction was pure panic, followed immediately by rage. How dare the universe drop this bomb right when I was finally figuring out my life? I was furious at both men for putting me in this position, which doesn't make logical sense, but was how I felt in the moment. Katie tried to be supportive, but I could see the judgment in her eyes. She'd never liked that I was seeing someone while technically still with Carson, even though I'd framed it as innocent friendship. Now the consequences were undeniable, and my victim narrative was crumbling. I drove straight to Bryce's apartment, thinking maybe this would force us to have serious conversations about our future. Maybe the universe was telling us we were meant to be together, that this baby was our destiny. I found him working on his motorcycle in the parking lot, all sweaty and focused. For a moment, watching him, I could picture our life together, unconventional but passionate, real in a way my relationship with Carson had never felt. But when I told him about the pregnancy, his reaction was not what I'd hoped for. His face went completely white, then through several other colors before settling on a sick greenish pale. "Are you sure?" he asked, which wasn't exactly the romantic response I'd been fantasizing about. "3 tests sure," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Surprise! The silence stretched between us while he stared at his hands, clearly trying to figure out what to say. Finally, "Is it mine?" The question hit like a slap. Not because it wasn't fair, given the timeline, it was completely reasonable, but because of how he asked it. Like he was hoping the answer would be no. "I don't know," I admitted. "It could be Carson's too." Another long silence. Then, "What are you going to do?" The way he asked made it clear what he was hoping I'd do. This wasn't a conversation about our future together or how we'd handle this new development. This was him looking for an exit strategy. "I thought we'd figure it out together," I said, hating how desperate I sounded. That's when Bryce dropped the bomb that shattered everything. He was getting back together with his ex-wife. They'd been talking for weeks about reconciling for their daughter's sake, a daughter I'd never heard him mention before. I was just a fun distraction while he worked through his feelings about his marriage. "I should have told you sooner," he said, not meeting my eyes. "But this thing with us, it was never supposed to get serious. I thought you knew that." I completely lost it. Started screaming about him leading me on, ruining my relationship with Carson for nothing. Being just like every other guy who uses women and disappears when things get complicated. He told me to calm down, but I could see neighbors starting to peek out their windows. "You can't just walk away from this," I shouted. "If this baby is yours, you have responsibilities." "Let's cross that bridge when we come to it," he said, already backing toward his apartment. "But Sadie, I can't be what you need right now. I'm sorry." He went inside and left me standing in the parking lot, pregnant and humiliated, with the full realization that I'd destroyed my life for a fantasy. The drive back to Katie's was a blur of tears and panic. By the time I got there, Bryce had already blocked my number. By the next morning, he'd blocked me on social media too. My exciting escape route had evaporated overnight, leaving me with the biggest secret of my life and nowhere to turn. I spent the next week in complete denial, convinced that Bryce would come to his senses and realize we belonged together. I drove by his apartment, tried calling from Katie's phone, even showed up at the construction site where I thought he might be working. But he disappeared completely, probably told his crew to watch out for the crazy pregnant lady. Finally, Katie sat me down for a reality check conversation I desperately needed, but wasn't ready to hear. "You need to tell Carson," she said. "And you need to stop lying to yourself about what this was with Bryce." "He said he'd always had feelings for me since high school," I protested. "Sadie," Katie said gently, "he was married for 3 years, right after high school, to his current ex-wife. They only got divorced 6 months ago. Whatever he told you about always thinking about you was just him telling you what you wanted to hear." The truth hit me like cold water. I'd been so desperate to believe I was special, that our connection was real and meaningful, that I'd ignored obvious red flags. Bryce hadn't been pining for me since high school. He'd been rebounding from his marriage, and I'd been convenient. But admitting that meant admitting that I'd thrown away a good relationship for an illusion. That Carson had been the real thing while I was chasing fantasy. That everything I'd told myself about needing space to grow was just elaborate justification for wanting to cheat. The conversation with Carson was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. I asked him to meet me at the park where we used to walk his sister's dog, somewhere neutral and public where I couldn't completely fall apart. He showed up looking cautious but hopeful, probably thinking I was ready to come home and work things out. God, he looked good, like he'd been taking care of himself, maybe even working out more. There was something different about his energy too, more confident and settled. "I need to tell you something," I started, "and it's going to change everything." I watched his face as I explained about the pregnancy, about Bryce, about how I'd been lying for weeks about what I was really doing. To his credit, Carson didn't interrupt, didn't yell, didn't storm off. He just listened with this expression of growing understanding and disappointment. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "So the separation was never about you needing space to grow. It was about you wanting to be with someone else." "No," I said quickly. "I mean, yes, but not how you're making it sound." I was confused about what I wanted, and I made a mistake. But I'm here now, trying to figure out how we move forward. "How we move forward," Carson repeated. "Sadie, you've been lying to me for weeks. You've been sleeping with someone else while I waited for you to work through your issues. And now you're pregnant. And you don't even know if it's my baby." Hearing it laid out like that made me realize how awful it all sounded. I tried to salvage something, anything. "I know I made mistakes," I said. "But we can get through this. We love each other. We can raise this baby together regardless of who the biological father is. People do that all the time." Carson just looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Sadie, I don't think you understand what love actually means. Love isn't just a feeling. It's how you treat someone. It's being honest and faithful and considering their feelings before you make decisions that affect them." "I do love you," I insisted. "I just got confused and made some bad choices. But I choose you now. I want to be with you." "You choose me now," Carson said. "Now that your other option didn't work out. Now that you're pregnant and scared and alone. That's not love, Sadie. That's convenience." The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Because yes, I was there because Bryce had abandoned me. Because I was pregnant and terrified. Because I needed Carson's stability and support. Not because I'd realized he was the love of my life. "I think you should get a paternity test," Carson said quietly, "and figure out what you want to do about the pregnancy. But I can't be part of this anymore. I can't keep letting you treat me like your backup plan while you chase other people." He stood up to leave, and I grabbed his arm, panic overwhelming me. "Please don't give up on us," I begged. "I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever you want. I'll make this right." Carson gently removed my hand from his arm. "Sadie, you can't make this right because you don't think you did anything wrong. You're not apologizing for hurting me. You're trying to manage damage control. There's a difference." He was right, and I hated him for it. Even as I was begging him to forgive me, part of me was angry that he wasn't being more understanding of my situation. That he wasn't stepping up to help me through this crisis regardless of how it started. After Carson left, I sat in that park for hours, trying to process the complete destruction of my life. In the span of a few weeks, I'd lost my relationship, my living situation, my self-respect, and any illusion that I was a good person who just made a few bad choices. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I had to find my own apartment, manage the pregnancy alone, and figure out how to rebuild some kind of life from the wreckage I'd created. The paternity test confirmed what I'd suspected. Bryce was the father. Not that it mattered since he'd made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. I tried reaching out one more time after getting the results, thinking maybe knowing for sure would change something. But he'd apparently gotten a new phone number. Katie was supportive but honest in a way that forced me to face reality. She didn't let me play victim or blame Carson for not standing by me. When I complained about how unfair everything was, she'd point out the choices I'd made that led to these consequences. "You had a good guy who loved you," she said, during one of my self-pity sessions. "And you threw it away for someone who was never serious about you. That's not bad luck, that's bad judgment." My family was disappointed but rallied around me once they understood the situation. My mom came to doctor's appointments. My dad helped me move into a new apartment. My sister threw me a small baby shower. But I could see the sadness in their eyes when they looked at me, the sense that I'd sabotaged my own happiness in spectacular fashion. The baby was born healthy and perfect. A little girl I named Lily. Holding her for the first time, I felt love like I'd never experienced before, pure and uncomplicated and fierce. For the first time in months, I had something good in my life that was entirely mine. But late at night, when Lily was sleeping and I was alone with my thoughts, I'd think about Carson, wonder what he was doing, whether he ever thought about me, if he'd found someone who appreciated what I'd been too stupid to value. I don't know if I'll ever have another chance at the kind of love Carson offered me, but I know I'll never take it for granted again. Never mistake stability for stagnation or loyalty for weakness. Some lessons you can only learn by losing everything you didn't know you wanted. Lily and I are building a good life together, just the two of us. It's not the life I planned, but it's honest and real in ways my old life never was. And sometimes, when she's sleeping peacefully in her crib and I'm watching the sunset from our little balcony, I feel something I never felt during all those dramatic, exciting months, actual contentment. I still think about Carson sometimes. Hope he's happy. Wish I could tell him I finally understand what I lost. But some mistakes are too big to undo. Some trust too broken to rebuild. The best I can do is make sure I never make the same mistakes again, and raise my daughter to value substance over excitement, honesty over convenience, real love over fleeting passion. It's not the ending I wanted, but it's the one I earned. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all.